The playful vacation season is almost over. So is the season of festivals in Kerala too. Now starts the days of studious toils. Welcome once again to News Analysis. News Analysis, a weekly magazine on current affairs. To begin with the main points in a nutshell. Obama says the world needs US-British leadership. Israelis see Netanyahu trip as a diplomatic failure. Less active at work, Americans have packed on pounds. We Indians too. US withdraws diplomats from Yemen amid clashes. G8 summit, Arab uprisings set to dominate agenda. US to withdraw troops from Pakistan. And now the news in detail. Obama says the world needs US-British leadership. In an address to Parliament, Obama says US-Britain alliance is still vital. Britain and the United States remain indispensable partners, President Obama declared Wednesday in an address to the British Parliament, even as he and Prime Minister David Cameron revealed subtle differences over issues like the military campaign in Libya and the Middle East peace process. The time for our leadership is now, Mr. Obama proclaimed, asserting the relevance of the British-American alliance in a world of rising powers and new threats. He rejected the argument that emerging titans like China, India and Brazil represent the future and the time for our leadership has passed. The United States and Britain, he said, remain greatest catalysts for global action. The President's speech to a rare joint session of Parliament under the vaulted timbers of ancient Westminster Hall was the capstone of a two-day state visit to Britain in which Mr. Obama was greeted with great pomp and personal warmth. Yet earlier, after backyard barbecue at 10 Downing Street, Mr. Obama and Mr. Cameron demonstrated that even those in a special relationship failed to agree on everything. Speaking at news conference, Mr. Cameron refused to rule out British support for the Palestinians as they push for United Nations recognition of an independent state. He suggested that the threat of European support could force Israelis and Palestinians back to peace talks. Mr. Obama, however, reiterated his opposition to the campaign, saying what the United Nations is not going to be able to do is deliver a Palestinian state.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Prime Minister, my lords and members of the House of Commons, I have known few greater honors than the opportunity to address the Mother of Parliaments at Westminster Hall. I am told that the last three speakers here have been the Pope, Her Majesty the Queen, and Nelson Mandela, which is either a very high bar or the beginning of a very funny joke. I come here today to reaffirm one of the oldest, one of the strongest alliances the world has ever known. It's long been said that the United States and the United Kingdom share a special relationship. And since we also share an especially active press corps, that relationship is often analyzed and overanalyzed for the slightest hint of stress or strain.
Mr. President, I think that response describes far more eloquently than any words of mine could do how much that very memorable and inspiring address was appreciated by everybody who heard it here today. You spoke with great warmth and great generosity about the British Parliament and the British people, and about the links that bind us, the values and the traditions that we share, the history that we have experienced together. But more than that, you spoke too, not just of the relationships of the past, but the relationships of the future. And I think that was what made what you said so inspirational.
The president struck a cautious note about the American military role in Libya, which contrasted with Mr. Cameron's pledge to intensify the pressure on Libya's leader, Colonel Muammar al-Gaddafi. While Mr. Obama said he was committed to the operation, even if it took a long time, and voiced confidence that Colonel Gaddafi would be forced out, he rejected calls for the United States to deploy more aircraft. I think there may be a false perception that there are a whole bunch of secret, super effective air assets that are in a warehouse somewhere that could just be pulled out and that would somehow immediately solve the situation in Libya. Mr. Obama said after raising issue himself, that's not the case. Mr. Cameron, while seeking to project unity on Libya, said each country had to ask itself, what is that we can all do to make sure the pressure is really brought to bear on Colonel Gaddafi? Britain, he said, would look at all options, though he did not confirm reports that it planned to escalate the air campaign by following France's lead in sending Apache attack helicopters to Libya. Calling each other Barack and David, Mr. Obama and Mr. Cameron strived for the easy familiarity of previous leaders like George W. Bush and Tony Blair. Mr. Cameron praised Mr. Obama for his proposal to use Israel's pre-1967 borders with land swaps as starting point to break deadlock between Israelis and Palestinians. But both drew a clear distinction between the special relationship that existed during Bush-Blair years and the relationship today. We are doing things in a different way, Mr. Cameron said. We have ruled out occupying forces, invading armies. For Mr. Obama, Wednesday was a day of business after the high ceremony of Tuesday, when he attended a state dinner with Queen Elizabeth II at Buckingham Palace and was honored with 41-gun salute. He spent 2 hours at the Downing Street restaurant of Mr. Cameron and also met with Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg.
As was mentioned, I wrote a pamphlet published by Demos arguing that the liberal moment had come. I argued that demands for a new approach to politics, for a radical redistribution of power, would soon have to be met by a liberal agenda. That moment arrived on May the 7th. Our challenge now is to seize this moment, the liberal moment, and to ensure we help to deliver a liberal parliament, a great reforming parliament that carries out a fundamental redistribution of power to the people.
Israelis see Netanyahu trip as a diplomatic failure. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel returned from Washington on Wednesday to a nearly unanimous assessment among Israelis that despite his forceful defense of Israel's security interests, hopes were dashed that his visit might advance peace negotiations with the Palestinians. One of the widely articulated goals of his trip were met with President Obama and address Congress was to find a way to lure Palestinians back to direct negotiation, thereby preempting their plan to approach the United Nations in September for recognition of a statehood within the pre-1967 lines. Instead, the Palestinians now say Mr. Netanyahu's speeches persuaded them that they had no negotiating partner. They plan to intensify their United Nations efforts, leaving Israelis worried about increasing international isolation and pressure. A cartoon in the centrist newspaper Yediot Ahronot illustrated the concern. It showed Mr. Netanyahu's returning plane flying near a volcano. Inside the plane, someone says, all in all, it was a very successful visit. From the volcano, smoke rises that spells out September. Newspapers and airwaves were filled with similar commentary. Avid Dishra, former head of the Shin Bet Internal Security Services and a parliament member from the centrist Kadima party, said on Israel radio, "My fear is this round of speeches in the United States may leave us and the Palestinians with a closed door." He added, it is impossible that in the present reality in the Middle East and here between the sea and the Jordan River, we have no next step. The praise here for Mr. Netanyahu's oratory skill on Tuesday in Congress was overwhelming. Even from his enemies, disputes about his performance were limited to how many times he brought the senators and representatives to their feet from 26 to 34. Ben Caspit, a columnist from the newspaper Ma'ariv, who spends much of his time attacking the Prime Minister, wrote, "This was a good speech, brilliantly delivered, with all the tricks and highlights in the right places." He said Mr. Netanyahu was focused, charismatic and self-confident, and called his address to a Congress a sweeping personal victory.
Turns to Israel today. In a rousing speech before Congress yesterday in Washington, he said Israel will have to give up some settlements to win a peace deal. Palestinians say they'll seek United Nations recognition of statehood if there's no breakthrough in the